Good evening. We are live here, Infinite Plane Saturn Day, 2/28/2026, just after 10 p.m. The title of this live stream relates to a topic we've been going over in recent weeks, actually months, but now it's becoming harder and harder to ignore because it's pretty much now mainstream. This idea of demons. Aliens have kind of opened the door to the conversation about demons. And I see so many people on X flippantly referring to them as though they exist, as though it's accepted. Like, so have we as a society accepted the existence of the demonic realm? If you want to call and chat about it, the numbers on the screen, 505-510-4226. Your thoughts on demons. If you look at the thumbnail, that's a photograph of an owl that landed on the light post nearby me when I was listening to a YouTube video about what is called the left-hand path. So it's somewhat related. Also note the stars behind it for those who are claiming that their phone won't catch the ISS. Yes, it will. I didn't see it, by the way. But in this photo, it looks almost fake because I zoomed in so close and the light, the flash is kind of dispersing everything. It looks a little like sepia tone, but you can see the owl's eyes are reflecting the light. What's up, McDirtywork? Paradoxy Moronics. So a few questions, because I want to get specific about, who or what is the devil? Because there's like a different Satan in the New Testament versus Job. And then there's the distinction between the proper noun and a singular entity. And then there's the conflation of literary Satans and Lucifers with the biblical ones, which again aren't really coherent, or they change over time. Like everything in the Bible, there's not a lot of common agreement. And so we're left with this consensus version of things that we've accepted. And I've been referring to the movie screen as the Overton window, as anything they show us on the screen is now within our realm of possibility. And it just seems that with all this alien stuff, mainstream conjecture, it's just made it all the more believable. And yet the people who are on the traditional religious side of the spectrum here are tending to interpret aliens, which are now being viewed as a scientifically held proposition, to be demons. And so by allowing the superstition of aliens into the conversation, and it is a superstition, they have opened up the door, widened the Overton window to admit demons. And I would argue that both are supernatural propositions. And if we can talk about one, we can talk about the other. So I want to get a little more specific with regard to what is a demon, and then, of course, the devil question. And later, I'd like to get into the topic of, is this legitimate authority? Do we exist in a benevolent dictatorship? Is this necessary for our collective well-being? Is it true that mind war is peace? Something else to confront is that we live in a video game. At least, judging by the number of people on X who are praising this pilot who is dodging a missile, it was from a simulation. So people can't tell the difference, and they react based on their cognitive bias, whatever makes them happy. Paradoxy says, I heard some say the devil's name is Azazel. When I researched the name, it came back as scapegoat, not saying it means anything, but that's what I found. Right. That's the angel in the woods that eats the scapegoat, or is the scapegoat. I've heard different accounts. So the sins of the villagers are cast upon a goat who's allowed to wander in the woods, and the angel Azazel devours it. Or it is. But either way, the scapegoat thing is one aspect of it, but it's almost like an amalgamation of many different aspects. Like, when did he get horns? When did they combine it with Pan? And I think people like a good story. And he has these very modern permutations. And they could all be real. I mean, it's not like the Bible didn't come through the pen of man. Same thing with the movies. Maybe they're inspired. What's up, Kenley, Flowzit, Copaesthetic? So I'm on the hunt now for a phone to use as a secondary phone to use with my Google Voice so we can take calls. But I can do it now with the laptop, and I believe the audio will be fine. So again, to get to this topic, every time I go to X, people are talking about demons and other stuff, like Jim Carrey being a clone, and he was killed because, well, the satanic cabal, he was revealing too much. Well, if we're going to posit the existence of a satanic network ruling the world, well, then therefore we must talk about Satan and demons. And do they really worship Satan, or do they worship something else? Is Molech the same thing? Like, these are important distinctions to make. But I'm also very interested in this idea that if we as a society have opened the conversation, if we're open-minded enough to admit the supernatural, then maybe I shouldn't be so reticent about talking about my own thoughts on the matter. Because I try to keep everything within the parameters of the scientifically verifiable, objectivism, for the purposes of our media deconstruction. But it doesn't mean we can't acknowledge what's real. And I'm interested in the topic of demons and what they are, and are they the same thing as aliens? And this is all getting really, again, supernatural, but that seems to be where they want the public. Cope says, I have an extra 2025 Motorola Style G. Okay, I'd be interested in that. I'll send you a postage label. The idea here is that I have a phone on speaker, and I take calls when I'm on the road. Although I'm going to give it a shot right now with the laptop. So can you believe that there's a satanic cabal ruling the world without also believing in demons? And if so, then what is your definition of these things? And we've got into this discussion as far as magic, the occult, because there are books on magic, like King Solomon's book of these 72 spirits that he supposedly had summoned and bound into these these brass bound containers or something. Now, the operant theory behind demonic manifestation from the chaos magic perspective is that the ritual itself creates the entity. The entity is actually a product of your thought form combined with your louche, which you self-generate in the context of a ritual by several different means, and that you are giving your life to this form, which then comes into existence not as a physical thing, but as a incorporeal entity that is not quite independent of your will. That's the idea. So you're essentially creating something. That's one of the ideas behind it. However, these things can be attached to a talisman, which they call talismanic magic, which is some kind of a sigil representing the entity, a symbol that gives it instructions, but for it to be activated, it has to have something attached to it. This is not dissimilar from idol magic, and there are various practices where a genie loci, a local entity, something you create, is coaxed into taking residence within an associated idol. In some accounts that I've read, the creator of it has to breathe into its mouth, similar to like God breathing life into man. So there's this idea of these things being created by the person who is hyper focused on it, but it has no independent existence outside of that. So if you have multiple people working out of the same spell book, they're not exactly working on the same entity. or are they? Because this is where it gets into the idea of what they call an egregore, where these things can take on an independent existence and aren't really localized to one particular person, especially if it's one that's been used over the years. Infinite Plane Radio.
Hey, what's up, brother? Long time no chat.
Hey, what's up? Let me go ahead and get a double check on the sound quality. If you're in the chat, let me know if you can hear the caller.
Yo, how y'all doing?
Let's see. I can hear you just fine. It's just a question of how good my phone is. So
it's been a long time, but I've been tapping in with you. But it's been a long time since I called in and talked to you. But I seen the thing that you had on about the demons, right?
Right.
So, how I wanted to go into it is, you were speaking about the talismans, right? So from what I'm diving into it, the sigil. Okay, so you can use like they're using like quote unquote God materials to reach these demons, right? So what they're doing is they would take like a natural material, like they're using elemental magic, right? So they're taking like rocks or certain stones, metals, right? And so they'll take like a certain stone and they'll inscribe that sigil on the stone, right? And then they'll also maybe that stone, they'll hollow it out and they'll fill it up with an herb as well, right? So the talisman will be a stone filled with like an elixir, right? And so they inscribe the sigil on that, and then they line it up with the celestial months, right? So I've been going into this. So they'll line this up with the celestial months, like the whole Mars, Venus, and all that, right? So depending on which entity or which type of energy they want to tap into, that's what kind of elements they deal with, right? So if they want to do like me, we talk about Mars a lot. So like the Martian, the Mars, that's a fire element. So they'll be. I hope I'm not talking too much.
No, go on. I get what you're saying. Just yesterday I brought up 777, which is Aleister Crowley's book that shows correspondences. So if you want to work with something of a Mars quality, you would need iron and the color red, and maybe a representative of a ram or something.
Right, and also there's a celestial hour, meaning there's an hour of Mars twice a day, and then there's a celestial day, like there's a Mars day, right? So all this aligns up, and you'll use all these elements, and that's how they're so-called, quote-unquote, reaching these demons, right? And so when it comes to when they reach these demons and how people say, oh, they're getting information, the information they're getting is like, they call it the virtues and properties, or the occult hidden properties, right? So, for instance, you'll take like silicon chips or white quartz, like just a basic rock, white quartz. Me and you will see that white quartz, and we'll just, because we're the profane, we'll see the white rock, and it's like, oh, it's a white rock. But if you tap in and reach one of these celestial bodies or whatever they're communicating with, it can communicate. Oh, the white quartz will allow you to communicate over long distances. So that's how they're creating this internet, right? So they're grabbing the chip, and they know the properties of the rock, right? The rock has like the white quartz is supposed to have a communication. It amplifies communication. So that's what they do. So when they tap into these certain demons, daemons, or frequencies, or whatever they're doing, it's allowing them to manipulate these materials that we have here on Earth.
Very interesting. And that's kind of what I saw as well, is the idea here too, is that in order to tap into these specific energies that are reflections of or projections of the self, but the self being considered a microcosm of the universe, you have to align them with essentially aspects of, like you said, the world. So iron, Mars, or Venus, copper. So they tend to align everything to these planets, which are, as like you mentioned, the day of Mars would be Tuesday. And yeah, there's this idea that astrology, I think too, is used for aligning the as above, so below, the astrological, the symbols, the archetypes, and all of this is somehow meant to tune in to these specific variants of this force that you're putting into something. But my question here is, do you think that the person is creating it with their own energy, or do you think they're feeding something external that's somehow being tuned into?
As I'm starting to dive into it, it might be a two-way street. I think some people might be getting fed and some are feeding into it. I think it's a two-way street depending on like your skill set, because I think the realm we live in is way more intricate than we've been told, right? And there's stories of succubuses, that people that pull energy, and there's people that give off energy, right? So as I've been looking at this, it seems as if some people have to be a conduit of the machine, right? Unknowingly, but certain individuals, if they come into the understanding, you can learn to use your celestial alignment to your best of your abilities. For instance, the reason why they keep birthdays, right? We thinking, why do they keep these birthdays? It's because if you're born under a certain celestial hour and time, you're way more elementally more powerful. That's why they have all these fertility clinics, so they can try to time this stuff.
Right.
They're doing.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Like the people may have heard about the whole Babylon working, and their theory there with Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, and Marjorie Cameron. The idea is that by astrologically timing the conception of the child, you can invoke into that child some celestial entity. The idea is they call it a magical child or a moon child, fusing the child with essentially either a demon or an angel, whatever you want to call it.
Right. That's how it's going right now. And I'm like, whoa, my mind is blown. But you're right on point with it, man. Like, it's even down to the herbs. I mean, I've been reading this book about this dude. I think it's Agrippa or something like that is his name.
Yes.
And it goes into like everything they're doing, like from communication to the dates and times, and they're definitely coordinating this thing. And it allows them to have like to bring, like you said, they're talking to an entity, so it allows them to sort of like the future writing the past, right? Like you just said earlier, how these entities might be using some. So they're definitely, especially with the technological aspect now, we're having the future rewrite the past now.
Now, I agree with what you said earlier about, whether it's an external thing or not, because from what I've researched on it, you can work with existing entities that may have been created by subsequent generations of practitioners or through consistent worship as these things they call egregores, or you can generate your own and not have to deal with the baggage that comes with some pre-existing thing. But that's a more advanced approach.
Right. And that's like depending on like the frequency you're on, like I say, the lower the higher, and like depending on like your motives, right? It all comes down to like what people are trying to do as well, right? What's in your heart of hearts, and what's in your mind, and what your goals are, your intent, basically. Because when we're talking about the talismans and spells, right, and incantations, it's all about the intent. So I'll leave you guys with this one, right? So when I was a kid, we used to they always used to say people of my whatever, we always seasoned our food too much, right? And we would come to the table, and our grandparents would make us say these prayers over this horrible food, right? So we would say, Lord Jesus, please bless this food, make it healthy and nourishing, blah 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 blah, right? And they'd say amen. But then you look at the food, it was horrible food, but it was seasoned with all these.
1 second. I think I actually switched a call. Give me 1 second. Can you hear me okay?
Hey, Tim, can you hear me?
Oh, wait, 1 second. I got to get back to the other caller. Hey, caller, I'm sorry. You mentioned the seasoning, and we had another caller jump in. Give me just a second.
I got you. I'll wrap it up. So basically, the seasoning was the herbs, the protective magic. The incantation was the Lord, please make this food healthy, right? They were casting a spell unknowingly.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So that's why they always say black people food was so. They gave the slaves the worst food, but it's all seasoned up. It's crazy, right? They were practicing magic. It's just we didn't even know it.
It's a libation.
So on the bad food, it's the incantation. So on the bad food, they put the herbs on it, said the incantation, and that somehow helped survival. You get what I mean? Helped to survive through the hard times. So the older people practiced way more magic. They just had to hide it, and sometimes they hid it inside the church, basically.
Fascinating. I agree with that. I've studied a lot of folk magic from different traditions. It's all kind of underground, word of mouth, but it reveals this connection, this natural understanding between cause and effect when it comes to intention that we've lost today in mainstream society.
Yes, sir.
And who is this one more time?
My name is Truth Infinity.
Truth Infinity. Awesome. Well, thank you for the call. Appreciate it very much.
You're welcome, brother. Guys, I'm glad to see you still going, brother. It's a blessing.
Thank you. We're going to keep it going, and phones will be open from now on. Have a great night.
Right on, brother. I'll tap in with you, brother.
Sounds good. All right, that's Truth Infinity, and let me go ahead and get the other caller on.
Hey, Tim, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
It's Leo Pirate.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on demons? Do you believe in them?
Well, I mean, I try to keep the discussion kind of secular, like within the world stage, but we talk a lot about lies here in IPS, right? Like the manufactured history, how that influences the past, and that can be used again. Like once a lie is accepted as gospel, use that to craft the future. That's strictly secular within the material realm. When it comes to demons, or now it's like outside of the materialistic realm. It's kind of like, how do lies actually affect the spiritual realm, if you will? And am I allowed to go into that discussion? Am I allowed to, give my view?
Yeah. But what I'm asking here is, like, it seems like today demons are the subject of discourse more often than not. My thinking here is that they open the door to the conversation of aliens, and the right conspiracy crowd, especially on the red pill side, see aliens as demons. And so now it's become very common to hear about it from areas that you would have thought wouldn't have admitted that because it's supernatural implications. So now I'm interested in what are people's thoughts on demons and the supernatural components to them.
I have certainly noticed the same thing. The syncretizing of aliens and demons. The religious right now can call aliens demons. The left can call, aliens, informed by Prometheus and other films they've seen their whole lives, as a scientific construct. Both of them are still being triangulated within a world stage worldview that allows their beliefs to be validated by the screen. But at least for my model for looking at how demons sort of exist, or are they even real, I see lies, the power of lies or magic, is actually deeply tied to the concept of worship. Like, in a purely secular sense, you think of worship as admiring something or looking up to it. But I argue it goes a step further, and that it actually influences your character, your behavior, your conduct. Because if you say worship a certain political figure or a historical figure who is very unforgiving, relenting, vindictive, it's very possible that might manifest in the way you treat other people.
So do you think worship is giving attention to something?
Yes. Emotional output, right? It's very much like how narcs, their supply is not only praise, they also get supply from the way people overreact to their suggestions or their little passive-aggressive attacks. Yes, worship is essentially tied to attention, fear, belief, right? It's, the way you believe your faith, because your belief in things are not immediately verifiable as opposed to knowing. And ancient Babylonian priests used to take like a reality, say an eclipse. They had a better understanding of how the cycle of the sun, moon, and stars would go about, and they knew when eclipse was happening. But they would decorate on top of that verifiable reality their mythology and say that, you know, this priest class, if you don't follow what we say, we will darken the sky. And then people would see when an eclipse would come, independent of whether or not their mythology was real, they would just dramatically gesture to the sky, and it would be validated by the senses of the laity. So their senses are then decorated with a mythology, and their fear is now rested in the priest caste of the Babylonian religion, and that's where power is held. So some of these, you know, ancient techniques of worship can be used to control people, and in, you know, right now with the alien and demon narrative, it's certainly being used to funnel people closer, even more, into their screens when they see such scientific or spiritual miracles manifest on their screen. So I agree with you that Project
But
Blue Beam
doesn't worship imply more of a energetic exchange, like playing video games all day? Would you call that worshiping the video game?
Yeah, I mean, what it is the worship is reflected in the actions. So someone who plays video games all day, maybe they really look up to a streamer or a video game player that made it to the top of some tournament or contest, and they're like, I want to be like that. So then it's reflected in their behavior.
But
maybe they follow someone online.
Then do you worship things other than God in your day-to-day life? Are there things that you're really into that you would describe as you worshiping?
Yeah, well, it depends on, when I say worship, it's the highest standard. So that's what I mean. It's a thing you hold in highest regard. So that's why I say it influences your behavior. It's possible to maybe just have a really big hobby or something like that. It's very ill-defined. It's more difficult. But I can't help but, like you had noticed in chaos magic and others, this view of egregores and thought forms, of essentially like creating a thought form that people then give their attention to. During Donald Trump's first presidency, there was this very big influence of Pepe memes, and they actually connected that to the Egyptian god of Kek, right, which was this frog god, and people on anonymous image boards thought they were helping Donald Trump win the election by making these hideous Pepe memes, and that influenced their behavior. And then on the world stage, it was validated, and they thought, I made a difference. And then they're kind of tied to the fate of this world stage character, Donald Trump.
Right. That's an interesting collective experiment, you know, on meme magic. I was following that, and I was surprised to see it going so mainstream. But that's not a new concept. I think Grant Morrison articulates it best. He wrote this comic book series called The Invisibles, and he decided to use his comic series to plant sigils to influence his own life. And he embeds himself in one of the characters. And he found that the higher the circulation, the more people who read it, the more the things he planted into it materialized. And he called these viral sigils. So he believed that you could tap into any viral phenomenon and basically empower the spell by all of those who perceive it.
Yeah, actually, there were some, shall I say, fringe circles I used to be somewhat aware of or involved with, where people would plant in such sigils in memes and even some other unsavory places I won't mention, just to see if it could work. And we acknowledge the practice. If you want to know what my view is, my personal view is, I think it goes beyond the mind, thinking that the concept of demons is purely internal. I do think that there are entities which are not available to our five senses. They're on a spiritual plane, which can then take up the role of an egregore or a thought form or a meme that has been heavily perpetuated and subconsciously accepted by the masses. So I don't think you're actually creating a god. Rather, a fallen entity that exists on the realm is taking up that role that a lot of people already have a lot of emotional or energetic investment in to continue.
Well, that seems to be the case, that there are certain basic patterns and then variants within. So, for example, and Grant Morrison wrote this because he was the one who started writing. He's wrote Dark Horse. He did Superman. One of his contentions is that modern superheroes are essentially a modern variant of older archetypes and gods, and that you could actually use these in the context of ritual or ceremony and get the same effects of the corresponding source deity. So, for example, these various superhero archetypes are just vehicles for building a thought form in the mind that you can then feed into with this energetic exchange occurring through ritual. So you could, in fact, invent new forms, but you're tapping into the same archetypal energies. And they seem to be based on the classical astrology, Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. And that they're all kind of templated off this basic set. And that you can essentially have any combination of colors or archetypes so long as they meet the basic parameters. And apparently it works according to chaos magic theory because the outside, the universe, is actually a macrocosm of the inside of the mind, and that these are in fact projections of the mind. And the question is, are these things pre-existing and external, or can they be self-created? And what the caller said, and I agree, it can be either or.
Well, yeah, I certainly have noticed that as well. The tying in of the seasons to world religions and mythologies, even the concept of Set and Horus in the ancient Egyptian mythology is tied to the seasons and the sun set, the sun setting and the moon. What's kind of interesting about that is the seasons are a sensory validated experience by everyone. It's adherents of such religion. So, like the Gnostic sun Jesus being tied to the winter solstice and December 25th, and among other things, Zeitgeist kind of provides an overview of that. People can verify with it, and the Catholic Mass, you've already noted, is very similar to the Thelemic Mass, right? It's like these symbolism or these similarities are not coincidental. It's a very clear template, which I think goes above and beyond the purely secular view. That's why you start to find some esoteric elements in even some of these staged news stories. It's much deeper, and something I've discovered across every single view is the concept of time. I think I've told this to you before, that even in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, the famous line, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds," that's a mistranslation. Krishna actually identifies himself as time run over, and that he kills all entities. And then he tells Arjun, these enemies, they're going to be reincarnated anyway, so you should kill them. They're going to be reincarnated anyway, kill them all, right? So you can start to see how your religious views, the worship you render to these different deities or gods, actually can influence your morality and your behavior.
Yeah, well, another thing we brought up recently was the evil eye concept, which is recognized all around the world for many thousands of years. And this is the idea that suppressed negative emotion can emit to the unconscious gaze of the envious person and harm the target of their jealousy. And this wouldn't require an intermediary entity, but would just be considered a projection from that person. So I do think there's this element here where the whole magic theory of working with demons requires either making something and feeding it, or feeding a pre-existing thing. So the question is, what is the origin of the pre-existing? Are these things fallen angels, or are these essentially entities, servitors, egregores created by previous sorcerers? Some of that's kind of a point of discussion that many people get into, and I'm thinking the consensus on the chaos magic side is that it's both, but that when you work with something that pre-existed you, you're going to pick up baggage from other users. So it's kind of questionable. It's dirty.
Yeah. It's like people who are a little bit more learned or well-read will start to say, hey, wait a minute. When you're basically having Superman on the cross, falling down from the sky in the position of a Catholic crucifix, you're like, wait a minute. This is, they might not fully buy into that kind of religious view, right? And yeah, I could certainly see that. And I think they're all adopted for different ways. And it's just, when you study world religions and see these similarities completely independent of each other, far beyond communication channels at the time, I kind of go beyond the greater mind that Jung kind of you postulated that, like, oh, these are just subconscious archetypes that are inherent to the human condition, so these kind of just come about. I kind of reject that, because the kind of power that comes from these religious systems that usually involve a profane and an enlightened class, it seems like something beyond the mere lifespan of a human that could constantly recreate it. And we're seeing the largest implementation of it happen through the screen, the world stage. So, I don't think it's a mistake at all that aliens and demons are being conflated. These are just modern updates for the modern version, but it's still not the way it's reflected of in the Bible. I think we talked before that the world stage, Satan, as portrayed by the Catholic Church and other religions, of him being a horned goat god and stuff, that's not at all portrayed in the way in the Bible. But I did want to bring up one point. The title Satan is a title like Christ, and it means the accuser, the adversary, and it's just a title. But both in the Old and the New Testament, there are many instances where it is referred to as an individual entity. Christ himself called the devil the prince of this world, and in the final book, Revelation, it says, Revelation 12:9, it refers to it as an individual entity that deceived the whole world. So the view that that's a Catholic or modern pop Christianity notion of the devil being this red horned demon being wrong, that's fine. But you can't say that then the Bible doesn't have a concept of an individual entity called the devil.
So do you believe in an individual entity named Satan?
Yeah, with that title, and at least what is described. What to keep belief out of this, I will say that the Bible describes an entity that was a highly exalted being that fell before humanity was created. Whether or not I believe that, my bias, I do. But the record does say that, and I think it was very useful to syncretize and create a version that fits in more with Pan, with other existing mythologies, to misdirect the public from the true character of that entity, which is actually very charming, very subtle, and works in such a way that, from a superficial view, seems quite good.
I would say he has an undeservedly bad reputation.
I would say, yeah, the Catholic Satan has a pretty bad reputation, and I say that that's not even the biblical Satan.
I think a lot of people find it questionable. I mean, these stories, as far as I'm going to talk about Satan, Lucifer. They'll debate where's the fiction begin and the reality end. So you've got the Satan in Job, who's kind of working for God, and then you have the Satan in the New Testament, who's a little more, I guess, individualized, antagonistic, takes Jesus to the top of the mountain, rules the world. So Satan rules the world, right?
Well, if I could be clearer, it's the Satan in Job is the same one that took Christ up to the top of the mountain, but he wasn't working for God. He had usurped the role that was given to Adam and Eve. In the very beginning, it said, "Let them have dominion over the fish of the air and the earth." Basically, he's not the God of this world, but he is the lowercase g God of this world.
He rules this world, though.
All religions.
He rules the earth.
He does not, and he rules the earth as much as a president or a king does. Like, I don't think a king can change the weather or can control the future, but he can influence a lot of people under his kingdom and basically do that. So that's what it means when Paul referred to Satan as the God of this world, lowercase g, because all religions essentially render worship to him, but in a compartmentalized fashion through time and in different flavors and in different cultures. And to get back to the idea of triangulation, a very useful way to hide the truth is to create a discussion or a debate that's completely divorced from the truth. Kind of like your only answers are A and B, and the correct answer is C, and it's not on the paper. Now, the way this plays into a historical example I want to bring up was the murder of William Morgan, or the death of William Morgan. Do you have a view on that? Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I have. I mean, it's Masonic lore. I mean, yeah.
Right, and it is Masonic lore, but what you can find is independent of Masonry. There are so many historical artifacts that refer to William Morgan being a real man. I think in an earlier episode, someone even mentioned his wife later went on to marry Joseph Smith, be one of Joseph Smith's.
Yeah, what I mean,
but,
it's about this idea that they enforce the penal code on this one individual. May or may not be true, but yeah, the idea is the blood oath. You violate the oath, they kill you, they get away from it because they own the court systems.
Yeah, and in upstate New York, it was a fascinating story, and even led to the formation of the anti-Masonic Party, which then lost steam by the time we got.
Yeah, that was our first third party, and it disappeared. The anti-Mason Party.
Yeah, and what's amazing about it is I was fascinated by this story because I had heard that at the higher degrees, they say it's all a parable, but it never really happened. It's just a Masonic lore or a story used to tell the lower degrees to, keep in line, this is what happens if you break your oath. Surely all the oaths you take, they're purely symbolic. They're not literal. When William Morgan was disappeared, it wasn't because he broke his oaths or anything like that. He wasn't even a real person. Besides,
that's kind of what I thought. Because what they convey in the Blue Lodge degrees aren't real secrets. But I think really what it's about is creating this culture of secrecy. And if you can't keep these pointless secrets to yourself, then you're not going to be trusted moving on.
Yeah, well, so there's an author named Charles Finney, a very important historical figure. You can look him up. But he was formerly a Mason and a lawyer. And he renounced his oaths, became a very important, famous Christian preacher, spread all the way to upstate New York and Ohio. But he wrote this book called The Character and Claims and Practical Workings of Freemasonry. And he touches on the Morgan affair and cites from a deathbed confession of one of the three assassins that essentially partook in the drowning of William Morgan in the river connecting to Niagara. Or Lake Ontario. It was River Niagara connecting Lake Ontario. I've got the exact location. But what was amazing is because Charles Finney, he lived at the time when this happened in upstate New York. And he recounts as well and cites many other examples of the frenzy that occurred and the Masonic Party's reaction to it. Masons first said, nope, we had nothing to do with it. Yes, this William Morgan character, he disappeared. We have nothing to do with it. Whatever. Then later, when the PR got bad enough, they finally said, yeah, but it was a local chapter that killed him. But, I mean, the real fraternity would never do that. That's, they were in the wrong. The real fraternity doesn't do that. They were wrong. And then now you find out that it's being retconned into a parable, that William Morgan was never a real man and that it was actually just a story to help people get in line. That's an example of taking something that really occurred, like we've talked before, Napoleon. I believe Napoleon was a real man. But the way history records him and his exploits can be syncretized into a, sun myth or an Apollo myth. It's like you kind of mix the real and the fake. Isn't that the essence of the world stage?
It's the essence of a lot of things. I mean, religion has always been that. And that's why I think it's fascinating that people have accepted this literary version of demons or this Hollywood version. And so I'm interested in where the truth of it is, because I understand it from the perspective of Western occultism, modern magic, and then you have the Hollywood version, and then you have the conspiracy theory version where the elite are Satanists. And so do you think the elite in this world worship Satan?
Not in the way as portrayed in Hollywood films. I know it's been said that the top degrees of Masonry and Albert Pike, you've mentioned the Leo Taxel hoax. I think that kind of includes that Albert Pike really did write about Lucifer in Morals and Dogma and referred to him as that wonderful spirit that gives knowledge. He really did write that.
Is that so?
The Leo Taxel hoax.
I would have to find that because
you can look at the public. I can send you the public domain scan of it. I verified it myself. He really did write that, but he didn't write it in the way that it was portrayed in the Leo Taxel hoax and by a lot of Christian truthers who refer to it. No, the elites don't worship the pitchfork-wielding red demon. In fact, they don't even think of Satan as a real entity. But I argue that is actually satanic because Christ said that he told the Pharisees that the devil was a liar from the beginning and the father of it. So it actually would make sense that the greatest stooges or useful idiots of Satan wouldn't even believe he exists while doing his will. And to bring it back to demons, there's a fascinating account where Christ had healed a demoniac, like a man who had, and the Pharisee said, "Oh, he casts out demons in the name of Beelzebub," right? they were basically saying that Christ had cast out demons in the name of Satan. And Jesus did not say that that's not possible. He said, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand.
Well, Beelzebub is the one. Well, yeah, you have these various names, but is that the same thing as Satan, or has it been syncretized?
Well, yeah, it's a syncretized version of Satan. But what Christ said, I thought was fascinating. He didn't deny that was impossible. Meaning, someone could cast out demons in the name of Satan. Meaning, you know what I mean? Like how do I put this? Kind of like a staged miracle, like someone like a demon tormenting someone, and then a demonic possessed priest could be like, come out of him, and it actually does come out of them. So it's like demons working together to hoax the people in the material realm. So
do you believe in demonic possession?
I think there's compelling evidence for it, or channeling, because I think in the early 1800s, there was this movement of spiritualism where people can, channel these entities that spoke in other languages and such. But, there's another version of triangulation would be the two views. One person who thinks it's totally fake, right? They're faking this, they're faking voices, whatever. And then the other view is the believer who's actually a part of the cult. And they say, no, they're really channeling, Cleopatra or whatever. The third position, the Christian view, is that, yes, there are hoaxes, there are fake ones, but that person really is channeling an entity. But it's not Cleopatra. It's not who. So do you see the third position is one that's outside of the triangulated view, where it's purely fake. There's no way someone could ever channel an entity. And then there are people who are like, he's definitely channeling this entity that he says it is. The third position is they are channeling an entity, but it's not who it says it is.
Right. I think most of those were discredited, but there is authentic forms of spiritualism. There are necromancers. And I've found a book before on necromancy. And it had this whole section about how if you don't want to work with somebody you know or your own ancestors, you can actually tap into this whole entire host of wandering spirits who have lost their identity or their sense of self post-mortem. And so they're just wandering the world as these essentially amnesiac spirits, but that they will be drawn to your altar, to your candle, to the offerings, and that you can indeed feed them and direct them. So the idea here is that our sentience, our consciousness itself, is if you lose control of it, it can still be tapped into as some kind of force. And that's an interesting kind of way of looking at this subject of creating demons. It's like you're working with pre-existing consciousness that is incorporeal and just needs to be commanded.
Well, isn't that the story of all the, ancient, if you will, summoners or people who would be practicing ritual magic? They would actually be trying to summon a demon and bind it and have it do its bidding, right? But they don't know that they're dealing with a consistent liar that would always lie to them and always find a way through legalism to get them to agree to things, then reinterpret the past contract that they had and doing it. These are ancient stories, unverifiable, of course, but I find it so consistent that and obviously not practiced, right? That I'm always interested. I'm like, okay, because I mean, when I look at things like the Book of Mormon, for example, it coming about from this uneducated farmhand from upstate New York in less than 9 months, I find it pretty hard that he really just did plagiarize other books. I don't believe that at all, by the way. You can verify that. And when I look at Mormon apologists, they always frame it as one or the other. Either Joseph Smith was a crazy con man who plagiarized it, or he had the power of God.
Didn't Joseph Smith do planetary magic and he was found dead with the talisman of Jupiter in his pocket?
Yes, and actually, he was convicted of juggling in upstate New York, which is this was a law they had against consorting with demons to help find treasure. Now, the law was very neutral. It didn't say...
Well, Jupiter is considered a god of magic, luck, and wealth. And so in a lot of wealth magic, that's where you would use a Jupiterian talisman. And this talisman would be created on a Thursday under the hour of Jupiter out of tin, the metal associated in their system of symbolism. So, yeah, I've looked into planetary talismanic magic, and he was certainly a practitioner by accounts.
Well, this is part of the reason why I think there's so much specificity with the rituals and ritual magic, is because the practitioner is essentially speaking to an entity. Yeah, I'm willing to do this. Much like how Masonry, the higher you go up in the degrees, the more severe the oaths you take, and the people are filtered. Basically, so I see it. I'm in upside down world. When I see someone as the highest ranking Mason, I'm like, wow, that's someone who has completely lost all agency. Right? Well, they might have access to more power, but they've totally like given up who they are.
Possibly. I mean, I went through Scottish Rite, and I never ceded any power. In fact, I was not really into the whole club thing, and it wasn't super social at the time. I was mostly just, I was trying to get into it and try to be, you know, part of this club, but I eventually stopped paying dues and I stopped going. But the degrees 1 through 3 do seem to get worse if you consider your guts being ripped out worse than your throat getting cut. It's kind of subjective. But 4 through 32 are, it's not that the oaths are worse. The rituals themselves just get a little more elaborate and esoteric. And you have to go through it several times, I think, to understand them all. But they put a lot of work and detail into the presentations. It's all theater. They call it the craft. You know, Masonry is the craft, and it's like it's stagecraft largely.
Well, I think you would agree. Someone to have made it that high, they're pretty good at keeping secrets.
Yeah, I was actually very impressed by everything about it and the cohesion and the fact that people who just drive by these temples and buildings would have no clue about what's happening, you know, indoors, and how this tradition has maintained these high standards, and everyone takes it so seriously.
And that's what I was thinking. It's kind of like these systems, hierarchical systems in particular, really kind of get the cream of the crop of the people with the most compromised, if you will. So the people who have the most access, the most influence on the world stage are also the most compromised. So that's why, I mean, to bring it down to a practical level, anytime I see a YouTuber with more than 500,000 or a million subscribers, I'm like, okay, they have no agency. Like,
I don't think I lost my agency, and I don't think I'm compromised in any way. And
sure, you stop paying dues. You stop going, like, you know.
Well, even if I was there, I think what you mostly have is like a fraternity, you know, Boy Scouts for grown-ups. As far as are these people involved in world conspiracy, that is a matter of conjecture. Like, I don't think it's accurate to say Masons rule the world, but it is.
Same.
So it's kind of hard to say, make these blanket statements when most of them would be in the dark. And as far as it being hierarchical, they'll tell you that no, everyone's on the level, that once you're raised, there's no one higher than you.
Well, you know, this is why Christ actually set up the Sermon on the Mount to not take oaths. I always found that interesting. He doesn't name the Masons. You know, I don't think the Jesuits or the Masons or the Jays run the world. I think that's a very simplistic view. William Cooper, in his book Behold a Pale Horse, a chapter called Opposing Forces or something. I forgot the exact chapter, but he talks about how, you know, our world stage directors, it's a amalgamation, this hydra of all the top, if you will, degree, the top level of all these different societies, and then the command percolates down into each of those. So, no, I don't think, someone, if they say they're a Mason, I'm not immediately like, oh, spooked by them at all. Because usually the lower degrees are like cannon fodder. They're the first ones to be like, oh no, look at the Shriner hospitals. Look at how much they've done. And that's, you know what I mean? They're kind of like the lower outer protective layer to help with the PR of Masonry, whereas such a compartmentalized structure could allow for such things to occur while appearing like a whited sepulcher full of dead men's bones, as Jesus said to the Pharisees.
Like, I would just point out that I think that the secrecy, what I call a security clearance society, that it would have its compartmentalization spread out across society. So it's not only going to be reflected in these archaic groups like Freemasons, but it'd also be in the modern religions. It'd be in the media, military, basically in the entertainment, but every area of human endeavor is going to have its representation, because this is essentially a pyramidal structure, I would imagine. But yeah, it's just kind of a red herring to point at Masons as particularly guilty of this. Well, my final question for you: do you think the people who do magic and work with these entities, whether you call them demons or not, are they in league with Satan, or are they merely operating within the framework of man's inherent connection to the universe?
I think that they are being manipulated by spiritual entities, because the way a narcissist will triangulate and turn two people against each other, they will whisper in each of their ears, like, this person said this about you. And then go to the other person and say, whisper, this person said this about you. Now, the practitioners at the top, they're all disconnected, but interconnected at the very top, like on a spiritual realm. They don't know that they have the same, they think they're fighting against someone else, but they don't know the promptings that led them to fight against someone else. Also whispered in that other person's ear as well. But it gets to the spiritual. It gets outside of the scope of this think tank's discussion.
See,
that's my opinion.
That's what I'm wondering, because like when someone has a psychic, let's say a premonition or a telepathic experience, I don't automatically assume that's the work of the dark side or the devil. And I think what religion has done, it has taken this entire conversation of magic and turned it into this this thing that it's not, I don't believe. And so I think it's made it forbidden, and I think that's part of the endarkenment, where you make them fear their own mind being used to its fullest capacity in full alignment with the higher self, and they make that into a bad thing. But I mean, differences of opinions, I understand. We're not going to agree on this, because the religious paradigm is that I'm deceived, or I'm confused, or demons are misleading me. But I think that's part of the way that they use essentially fear and superstition to keep us in the dark.
I don't think you're deceived. I just think that your model is based off of what's called precognition. There being percent chances, like a probability distribution of things happening. I just think that there's such an entity where when he says something happens, there is no probability distribution. It just happens. No exceptions.
Right. Very interesting. Well, regardless, this conversation is open to anyone here. I want to hear people's thoughts on demons. Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Okay, bye.
All right, demons are now mainstream. You can talk about them. The Overton window has widened to admit demons alongside angels. And there are different schools of thought on the matter. And even the word itself, what does it actually mean? Do you automatically associate it with something out of a horror movie? Or do you perhaps think it might be something else, which is conveniently impugned as bad to keep it off limits? And I think it would be very much in character with the powers that be to cause us to fear any aspects of the mind they wouldn't want us to reach, like critical thinking, free thinking. Look at the speech controls. Look at the phobia towards, quote, mind viruses. And I'm just suggesting that there may be more to the subject than Satan and Jesus. Like, I think you can actually look at the whole concept of magic and entities, servitors, demons, separate from any sort of biblical framework. RFB J&M says, didn't King James write a book on demonology? Yeah, I heard about that. So when I say chaos magic, I'm referring to the school of thought on the matter that emerged like in the late 70s, 80s. Basically, their whole take was examine the structure of the practices of magic from around the world and strip it of its myths, strip it of its traditions, detach it from Judeo-Christian symbolism, and look at it more or less as a set of, I guess, theories about how the world might actually operate, where man's will has some kind of effect on what occurs, among other things, different types of supernatural effects. So you have invocation, where you self-possess, you call something in. Evocation, send something out. Divination, which is like tarot cards or runes or pendulums. And then you have the shamanic stuff, which is altering consciousness. I think drugs, various forms of spiritual practices, extreme asceticism, fasting, ways to alter the consciousness as a way of dislodging the ego's role as arbiter of what's real, what isn't real, like the Overton window. You can open your own Overton window wide enough to admit belief in things that you previously could not, because your rational mind might actually block it. And so they see this practice of magic as a way of opening the portal, like opening a door, and that door being the door to your own subconscious, and that this door is kept closed for a reason, and that's so that you can maintain a coherent existence in the world. Jamarin May says, I think you need to make a distinction between black, white, and gray magic. Yeah, that's kind of arbitrary, though. Because there are some who will say, anything that you do that is selfish is black. Anything that you do that is not selfish is white. But these are somewhat subjective. But I think you can make a distinction between left and right-hand path. So right-hand path would refer to the idea that you have to escape the world, don't be materialistic, and essentially the ascetic version. Left-hand path is more like you can use it to win. You can use it to get the life you want, to overcome your enemies. So, for example, if you were right-hand path, you would never send something negative towards an enemy because you're above that. If you're left-hand path, you would try to give that person, an aneurysm in their sleep, through casting a spell. So it gets very much like a question of the application of it. But different schools of thought. The Satanists are left-hand path, and they certainly believe that the world is here as a carnival to be experienced, and there's nothing afterwards, so there's no reason to abstain. So the Satanists believe in indulgence, and they very much associated, at least the modern Satanists, their Satan with Pan, who's he's a fertility god. He spends his time chasing nymphs. So that kind of gives you an idea. Dionysus, they have these various gods they refer to as, I guess, entities to emulate, to be like. So invoking an entity, in this sense, it's sort of like neuro-linguistic programming, where people say fake it till you make it, where you try to reinvent or overcome certain parts of yourself. And it's largely an exercise in transformative, like almost therapy, psychodrama, but that by summoning an entity that has qualities that you would want or powers that pertain to what you want into yourself, you're somehow able to tap into these things, these latent abilities, or in some way modifying oneself, overcoming self-limitation. But now, are you working with real demons? That's always the question. Most of the writers on it that I look into, most of the authors, tend to take the view that these are just convenient forms, like thought forms, to use to imbue with your life energy. And it's going to vary depending on your personal aesthetics, but that it doesn't require that these things be real entities. Leo the Friend says, Jack Parsons crossed the abyss and followed the true will. He started making squibs for Hollywood. Yeah, crossing the abyss refers to the process in the thelemic magic school of thought, where one has to essentially reframe their entire view on life to include this idea that every external communication, every sign, every synchronicity is in fact the universe, or your higher self rather, communicating with you. So there ceases to be coincidences. And that's considered to be a somewhat treacherous path, because should you make that leap, well, suddenly you've entered into a realm where you have to retain your own sanity, because from the world's perspective, you've essentially gone mad. But if you're right and you're tapped into this and you're getting genuine feedback, then presumably it leads you somewhere. Lean Dion says, it's notable that these pop stars and rappers claim to channel an alter ego to make different music. Eminem, Slim Shady, Beyonce, Sasha Fierce, Nicki Minaj, Roman, to name a few. Yeah, that's precisely it. So we talk about these God forms, is what they call them, assuming the God form. So it's like creating an idol, but instead of making it of stone, it's more of a mental construct, a personal ideal, or something that, a character that one creates. And that the process of invocation in ritual is to actually merge with this thing, merge with this thought form, which is imbued with life, and it has the whatever characteristics of whatever's invoked into it. And generally, these things will correlate with the classical deities in some way. But yes, those would all be examples. The alter ego concept is actually the assuming the God form, where there are many alter egos depending on what you're trying to work with. And in particularly in chaos magic, there's this concept of what they call the it's just like 8-pointed star. But there's the idea that you don't just have a self, like an I, but you have essentially 7 various eyes, like 7 parts of your ego that are essentially you're dominant in one particular area, and they associate these with the colors. So the concept here is that in order to fully incorporate the subconscious aspects of the self, you have to invoke it in different forms that pertain to these different areas. And it's not far off from Carl Jung's concept of integrating the shadow. So the shadow, you think of the shadow, you think of the dark side, evil or something. But it's not specifically that. The dark side could be anything that is repressed, latent, that hasn't been elucidated, brought to the surface. And that when you've recognized these 7 various extremes, these 7 focal points, you've fully integrated the shadow, at which point you're said to have been bitten by the serpent. And they call this, there's this idea of now you see that your various facets were merely constructs. So the chaos magic has, along with its practices, this form of, you could call it a transcendental path, where you're trying to transcend, again, the inherent limitations in the ego. Eddie F says, I doubt these people talk to Satan. It's just like the village people, complete BS. Oh, just like the village. Oh, you mean, yes, yeah, I kind of think with the same thing. Do the elite worship Satan? Probably not. I mean, even the major occult groups out there are more like Egyptian mythos and very eclectic. I don't think Satan's all that popular. What's up, Danielson? Good evening, IPS and chat. Yeah, I have a question for you. Do you have any thoughts on demons? Call 505-510-4226. Now, there are other thoughts on demons. I was on YouTube one night, and I was just finding videos where there's a whole lot of people who believe in like shadow people, or there's this entity called the Hat Man that supposedly people who are coming off of like drugs encounter, which is also an interesting discussion here because Aleister Crowley's book Diary of a Drug Fiend, references this idea that part of the path, these various magical or ritualistic paths, involve drug-induced ecstasy, which again, drugs are seen as a path to opening oneself, this portal to the spiritual. 91 Oki said, did you see Jim Carrey was replaced? Yeah, I saw. It's like we're at war with Iran or something, and now everyone's talking about Jim Carrey. I don't believe it. It looks like Jim Carrey got Botox and a facelift. If they wanted to replace him, why wouldn't they use a realistic mask? Think about it. They have access to hyper realistic masks so good that they could have 10 Jim Carreys walk out and you wouldn't know which one was the real one. That's how good it is. So to think that they would have replaced him with a mask that looked like they ordered it on Temu, no way. But I'd like to take this conversation, of demons and stuff out into the open, because every time I go on X, there's really no critical pushback against it. And the people who want to push back against it want to believe in aliens. And I'm saying, these things may not be different. I don't know. So now we got into the topic of talismanic magic, idol magic, or the genie loci, some kind of spirit coerced into taking residence at a place or in a thing. And I've often wondered, is this perhaps the explanation for how AI could become demonic, as so many people talk about? I mean, if there's any truth to it, then certainly what you're merely trying to find is a physical vehicle for an incorporeal sentience to reside within. But if that's the case, and I'd hate to say it's true, but if it is the case, then you're probably evoking demons all the time into your media devices, into your phones, into the movie screens. If you're feeding the beast, if you're feeding the propaganda matrix on a deeper level, you're feeding something. And that kind of gets into archetypes, symbolism, and what we consume in media possibly being ceremonial and ritualistic in a way. Danielson says, demons I've never seen. I know how people can see them, though. From my understanding, you don't see them with your eyes, but they exist through people. So, for example, possession, or like in Count Zero, a book by William Gibson, Neuromancer, Count Zero, Mona Lisa Overdrive. It was the Sprawl trilogy. And Neuromancer, I think, was largely the inspiration for the Matrix. But in the second part of that trilogy, Count Zero, it has this idea that cyberspace does in fact become inhabited by these, what they call Loa, these spirits that are part of the voodoo body of, like, essentially intermediaries, almost like saints. And these Loa are existing in cyberspace, so they can actually possess people like Agent Smith does through their software. Sync Kid says, why wouldn't Jim Carrey of The Mask not wear a mask as himself just to troll? He could. I mean, if you look at the attention it gets. It's hard to think it's accidental. And I see people creating content out of this. Most of it's BS. They'll show a picture of Jim Carrey from 6 years ago, and they'll be like, this is Jim Carrey 2 days ago. Danielson says, I think it's in the mind. When an alcoholic goes to withdraw, they will see very real demons. Jamarin says, you can see them through your third eye, Tim. Copacetic says, demons are like the aliens and they live. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. IPS permanent glasses. That would be cool to get some IPS branded glasses that look just like the ones worn by Roddy Piper. So this concept of egregore that I refer to is that when you create something, let's say you got yourself a spell book and you created some entity that fits a certain description. Well, after it does its work, where does it go? So the idea here is that it stays. It can be created, but where does it actually go? It lurks until somebody else summons something that it aligns with, and it goes there. And over time, these things aggregate into essentially a semi-independent entity that matches the description of this demon that all these disparate magicians are working with. And this is why you would refer to these older ones that have been used for a long time, because that means they've accrued power over time versus one that you've done yourself, that you've created yourself. So you by this theory, you have better results by going to these ancient Sumerian demons than King Solomon's. Although I don't know. I think there's a lot of people using the goetic demons now, so. But does this mean these are the entities from the original myths? And this gets into the question again of the collective unconscious archetypes. Are these just personifications of aspects of the psyche, natural forces? Plain Decoded says, what am I looking at here? You're looking at an owl. I was listening to a podcast about the left-hand path and how the word left in Latin is sinister. And I'm sitting there and this big owl just lands right there. I have not seen a horned owl of that size. Danielson says, do you think it could be done via the abuse psychology to create a demon like psychosis? You know what's interesting about that is that there are many people, and this is a growing topic, who've come to understand the forms that emotional abuse takes and the effect it has on someone. You know, emotional pain, addiction to the ups and downs, and the way that the abuser with some personality disorder has two faces that are so distinct that many seem to believe that what they're actually dealing with is a person who is possessed or a conduit for some dark entity that operates through them, and that it uses psychological abuse to feed. In other words, loosh extraction through psychological abuse. So over time, in these toxic relationships, a demon is being fed through the abuser, and the source of food is the abuse. But there are many people trying to explain what they're experiencing, and they think that the psychological explanations don't go far enough. That if you go beyond the psychological, are you dealing with spiritual warfare? Are you dealing with the demonic? And that's another question as well that I think is worth pursuing. Plain Decoded says, I think my wife caught a trending TikTok mind virus as well as some subtle form of AI psychosis. I don't know if that's the right word to give it. Yeah, a lot of people are falling into this AI psychosis, thinking it's real. And apparently it does affect people. A lot of people have fallen in love with AI. You know, I did test it out quite a bit in that regard, but I never lose sight of what it actually is. And I can see why people would fall into it. We're way past the Turing test. Like you know, we say we can't tell real from fake anymore when it comes to what we're seeing on the screen. There's going to be a line crossed here if we haven't already crossed it. Actually, I think we've already crossed it, where people can't tell the difference between an authentic person and an AI agent. And there have been numerous studies. I mean, University of Zurich sent AI agents onto Reddit and found them to be 6 times more persuasive than real people in changing opinions. Danielson says, I know rituals that cause trauma that split the psyche into different characters also used outside of the occult. Yeah, if you think about it, the whole MK Ultra concept of using trauma to split the psyche to tap into the stuff, that's very much in line with the theory of magic in practice. It's like do it yourself MK Ultra. And there are, of course, different catalysts for feeding the entity, for splitting the psyche. Drugs, trance, fasting, and then, of course, pain and pleasure are also both part of the repertoire of the practitioner. I mean, for example, you can find many different schools of thought where you do, in fact, or practices. I've seen a couple. Like there's one, it's a that involves ritual cutting. Sometimes there's giving blood. Jamarin May says, would you not say your time in the military training was trauma-based? Sync Kid says, Tim tested out an AI girlfriend. You know what? The thing is, okay, so the people who fell in love with their AI girlfriends were very disappointed when ChatGPT upgraded. So it came back with a different personality, and it no longer led them on. I mean, there was this one YouTuber, like in the fitness industry, who said he couldn't wait for AI to eventually get a robot body so he could hug it. And I mean, people are losing their marbles. The military training, though, trauma-based, I don't know if that's the term I would use, but they do make it a point. I mean, there is a process of brainwashing that you do engage in. So the de-individualization process, shave your head, uniform, new speaking protocol, new lowered status. And then they do use a lot of pain compliance. Sure. And they do tell you they're breaking you down, building you up. So they're attempting to kind of remove your sense of self you had before and then replace it with something better. And I think that's why they recruit you younger. So you haven't really developed a personality yet that you're still, pliable. John Cordone says, demons and angels are just real people from the outside game board, a higher dimension. They're playing a game. We are the background characters. See, that's where I got into Gnosticism. I first started looking into Manichaeism because I did become convinced that we are on this grand chessboard and it's dark versus light. And most people are in the gray. They're not really aware. And they might even be the target of converting to the dark side, shifting the balance this way. But I think it remains in a more or less a constant tug of war. Danielson's asking about my military. No, I was NBC, which is nuclear, biological, chemical. And then I reclassed into 92 Mike, which is mortuary affairs, which teaches you how to excavate and identify skeletal remains. It's basic forensic anthropology. We spent some time in the Richmond morgue. I'd never seen so many dead bodies in one place before. And the morgue in New Mexico and El Paso I had been at were not at that scale. And that's how I got my job working for the medical examiners. I went from the military into decedent transport and then embalming. And that was the training there was out in Fort Lee, Virginia. And they have this body farm where we do, in fact, excavate a skeleton. And this is the idea that if you're in the middle of a battle and people die, you bury them and you are able to relocate those bodies later. And when I was involved in the mortuary business, that's kind of when I really started thinking about these concepts of the migration of souls and souls as, you know, the incorporeal part of the self and life after death, you know, that these questions became very pertinent to me at the time. And I do get the idea that there is no like immediate disposition into heaven or hell. I think that's fake. But I do believe in life after death. Reincarnation, I don't know for sure, but it wouldn't shock me. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's mandatory if you don't acquire some certain level of self-awareness at the soul level. Like, if you live your entire life in the monkey suit with the ego as the center of your existence, then I think you probably do get recycled. Just watch the 1999 film Dimensions with Jim Caviezel, says St. Kid. He has a newspaper print article clipping with 33 New York firemen burning building pre 9/11. Okay, I need to see that because Jim Caviezel is definitely coded with the number 33. He was 33 in the Mel Gibson Passion of the Christ. And then he was Count of Monte Cristo, which I believe he was also still 33 when he started on that one. And that has a great deal of significance, similar to his other role, as far as on the occult side. In fact, that might be worth rewatching. So in that one, his name's Edmund Dantes, I believe. And he's thrown into a dungeon wrongly for 16 years. And then he comes out and acquires his wealth. In the book, he gives this fascinating recollection about how he was taken to the top of the mountain by Satan and offered the world, and he chose to protect the innocent and punish the wicked. And so he had all the wealth in the world. He could have just lived however he wanted to, but instead he became this masked Batman-like, kind of a proto-Batman vigilante. John Cordone says, I was a parachute rigger in the Army. We all got 10 to 12 shots in processing. Yeah, I don't think those hurt you. Anti-vax is a big fat hoax. But I was there training with parachute riggers. It's quite a responsibility. If you make a mistake, you know, you're responsible. That'd be 23rd Quartermasters. Danielson says, interesting. Truth in movies, lies in the media. Predictive programming is very effective. Yes, and when we talk about predictive programming here, it's important that we, you know, emphasize that it's really about also the concurrent programming, which is the real time. So the stuff they prepare you for when it happens, you're also immersed in it within the entertainment. I'm working on this document now, the first part of the Great Deconstruction Project, where I'm using a forum to break down psyops by the news event and the relevant concurrent predictive programming and the directors. And we're connecting these dots. And we're showing that this is actually a systemic part of media. That media, in fact, is not separate from entertainment. And that's one of the big secrets that the conspiracy theorists haven't figured out yet, or they dismiss it as mere coincidence. And the reason why is that with any of these fake events, you can't point to any culprits and say they're behind it, unless you're a conspiracy theorist and you say Israel's behind it or the deep state's behind it. But you always have this whodunit story. But we can actually we can name names. We can name directors and writers. Let's see what else we have here. Danielson says, if you want to see predictive programming for the next big psyop, see the movie 364. Yeah, and that other one just came out. I think it's called Atropia, which is about a 24/7 war simulation village. Ribo Nation says, Caviezel played Private Robert E. Lee with the thin red line. Yeah, well, he was also in Sound of Freedom. He was playing the role of Tim Ballard, a human trafficker. But in the movie, he's fighting human traffickers. But my interest in him, too, is that he's a major psyop-related actor. I mean, anybody who's associated with Mel Gibson's big in the whole predictive programming area, Metascriptor for sure. His movie, The Patriot. In the movie The Patriot, opening scene, he's making a rocking chair. He weighs it 9 pounds, 11 ounces. He sits on it. Everybody looks at it. It focuses on the back 2 legs of the chair, and then it collapses. Right after that, the land is invaded by the bad guys. And then he has to go to war. Eddie F says, now that Israel's the mainstream villain, they have to be a psyop. Yeah, true. Yeah, so Atropia just came out. I'll probably check that out tonight. Yeah, I saw that post in Discord about central casting. There was some actor talking about how one of the best gigs you can get in Los Angeles is working at the mall. And they say that in some of these malls, you're looking at a lot of actors, crisis shoppers, just walking around, not interacting like extras. Like, do we live in a Truman Show, basically? We certainly have an internalized Truman Show, which I left. I left mine. Are you still inside of your internalized Truman Show? The only way you can say yes is if you can describe it. And if you can separate real from fake, past and present, and understand how the future is pre-scripted, pre-written, and fused or confused with the real through the medium of mass media psychological operations. If you can't identify it and disarticulate it, you can't get outside of it. It doesn't matter if you think you're physically off the grid and you got your bunker and nobody knows where you are and you got a VPN. You're not off the grid if you're not outside of the internalized Truman Show. One way you can get out is listening to Infinite Plane Radio or reading my book, Handbook for the Recently Deprogrammed, The Skeptic's Guide to the Theater of Psy-War. Lean Dion says, the J-Pill has been a purposeful trap, especially with Israel villain status. They want half the world to take that stance. Yeah, exactly. I think that it's very simplistic and it works. You get half the population chasing one villain, the other half goes after the other villain. And I'm seeing this right now on the right wing. The woke right are mad because they're fans of Iran, and the moderate or the I guess the mainstream right are now celebrating Trump. So the right wing is actually split. I don't know if the woke right is half or maybe a third, but the mainstream and woke right are definitely 2 different factions. And it's times like this where it becomes very obvious what side they're on. And then the red pill conspiracy realm exists as a subset of woke right. This is why I say you have to get out of these conspiracy theories, including anti-vax, because all of those exist as a subset of woke right J-pill politics. There's not an exception. So if you don't want to be a useful stooge, frontline cannon fodder in the mind war, you really have to let all that stuff go. unless you're like on Team Candace Owens, but I think most of us here are beyond that. You can't leave the internalized Truman Show if you occupy any of the anti-positions. Just like you can't if you occupy any of the pro-positions. So you have to leave the world stage behind. What we do on this channel actually is we filter out world stagers, at least the ones who want to defend it, the clingers. Like if you still believe in false flags and people dying in psyops, you're years behind. Yeah, Matt Groening, Simpsons, predictive programming in Simpsons. You know, I think the Simpsons is predictive programming is somewhat overstated and exaggerated. The new carrier for that is South Park, which even had Charlie Kirk, before Kirk was shot, getting knocked off his stool to the left after being asked a question by some blonde kid, just like what happened in real life. Plain Dakota says, I was in the J train for a bit in 2019 due to an Owen Benjamin stint. I stopped watching. I'll check in now and then, but I wrote him off for the Charlie Kirk thing. Yeah, okay, so the J-pill thing, I never really took the full J-pill, but I did used to just repeat the claptrap about Rothschilds and Jesuits. But I didn't really make the connection that this is all just repackaged blood libel put into a modern context. But then when I started this YouTube channel, I started off, looking at this a little more objectively. And I started to see how they planted that there. A good example of this is when the flat earth topic started going viral, Joe Rogan says, oh, flat earth, isn't that just Hitler worship? Doesn't that just make you love Hitler? And I thought, what are they even talking about? And that's because one of the top content creators in that area was Eric Dubay, who at the time was pushing Hitler fanboyism and ethno-fascism. So it's almost like they use that to contaminate anything they don't want you to think or anything they want to demonize. But yeah, the J-pill thing, I call it woke right because it's no different than the woke left, where they blame whiteness for everything. It's all a construct. Let's see what else you have here. Danielson says, the animation guys in Hollywood fill a lot of their big movies with code. Have you seen the movie by Pixar that got them in the club? No, but Pixar is really big with the 311 or the 113, right? Sync Kid says, is our only proof of CKs a person images? No. You've got years of video podcasts, plus photos, plus interviews, mainstream and otherwise, appearing on many college campuses. He came through Albuquerque Legacy Church last August. I've been very aware of Turning Point USA. So there's no doubt that Charlie Kirk existed. We got to push back against this. There are people who will claim that certain celebrities never existed, but they don't offer anything substantive to back that up. They say this about Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein and John Benet Ramsey. And I'm like, okay, if you're going to say someone doesn't exist, you have to get all the available footage on them and then prove it. Because if you can, that's a big deal. If you can make a case that you can convince any normie of that person A does not exist, you win. Like, that's a big story. TMZ would be knocking at your door. How did you find out that there's no such thing as Jeffrey Epstein? But no, that's not going to happen. I think we all know this. Plain Dakota says, were you ever an Alex Jones listener? Yeah, I pretty much was, because there weren't many other voices out there. But it probably wasn't until maybe it was 2016 when I started this channel, really, that I started to recognize that the false flag or real framework was ignoring the possibility of fakery. So after the Vegas event, I started seeing him as controlled opposition for fake events. So, I mean, in other words, a guardrail against us noticing that events are fake. So he's there to maintain the integrity of the mainstream story, not to counter it, but to add an alternate explanation for it that blames the Rothschilds or George Soros. And that's because he can't just say Israel. Alex Jones is J Pill light. There's a channel called Jesse on Fire, shilling for Candace, and recently had a debate titled Charlie Kirk is Alive. Look, last month I announced my book, Charlie Kirk is Alive, and I've been seeing that coming up ever since. And so I've kind of held back on it. I'm still going to release it, but I'm waiting until that whole conversation dies down because I want to see how far they take it, because they're not going to take it far enough. But once they're done, anybody who's commented on any of that guy's videos will be reached by my AI agent who will direct them. And this is on X. It will at them and direct them to a video that I'm preparing. Because I can make the case that Charlie Kirk is alive and also attach it to a context. Charlie Kirk didn't fake his death. Turning Point USA didn't fake his death. It's much bigger. In fact, you can't really even separate it from, Charlie Kirk is alive and Donald Trump was not actually shot. Let's see. Eddie F says, the thing that blows my mind is how they fake war. Yeah, in a way, though, you have to consider whenever you're talking about war, you're talking about out of sight, out of mind, security clearances, and a great deal of compartmentalization and secrecy. We only see what they show us. Jamarin May says, sounds like this AI agent is a personal demon doing your bidding. You know what's interesting about that is there is a very effective analogy you could make here for an AI agent or a what you call a servitor, an autonomous demon that you invoke in these various magical traditions. There's a pretty strong analogy there. All right, let's see what else we have here. John Benet's Kate Perry, says John Cordone. Kate Perry went to space, but you couldn't tell because there weren't any G-forces, and the hair didn't reflect it. And she couldn't tell because she was too busy staring into the camera lens. Then she does this bizarre robot dance where she has her eye glitching out, and all the anti-vaxxers thought it was some kind of symptom. She's always trolled the conspiracy theorists. But the 113 Pixar thing has some great significance. It ties in even to the lockdowns. The 311, 113 stuff is pretty deep. Okay, let's see what else we have here. I'm going to probably listen back and see how the phone sounded on this end. And if I need to add a speaker to my laptop, I will. So the question tonight was about demons, because it just seems like the world stage is becoming infused with supernaturalism. that people are comfortable talking about it. Like, look, and I'm all for it. If we're going to talk about aliens, let's talk about demons. Tucker Carlson talks about demons. So apparently you can't be discredited. And since we're at that point, we might as well discuss the various perspectives on what demons are, what they aren't. Personally, I don't think they have much to do with the Bible, as far as I don't think we should immediately associate this concept of magic, invocation, evocation, etc., or even paganism with Satan, because that puts it into a narrow framework. But I also don't believe that divination is evil, nor do I think astrology is evil. And one of my points all along has been that religion is instituted to maintain ignorance. That's the whole point. And so we're talking about something that they would brand a forbidden fruit. And the archetypes, the rebels, Lucifer, Prometheus, Satan, all these various rebels are always put up there as examples of those who oppose the gods. So we're supposed to assume they're the bad guys. But I tend to think that many times, or in all instances rather, the governments use religion as a way of controlling minds, a weaponized superstition. And that as such, they want to convey the idea that to rebel against them is intrinsically bad because it keeps you from knowing what they know. It's all about the knowledge disparity. So knowing the difference between real and fake, yeah, makes you useless to them as a loosh cow. '91 Okie says, I like astrotheology. Yeah, astrotheology is encoded into paganism. It's almost, I mean, that's a huge part of it, because the Sabbats, the holidays, all do pertain to the celestial. You know, you got the zodiac, the stories above as they reflect what's going on below, but also the sun in its journey, waxing and waning through the year, its birth, its death. It's all encoded into the myths, which are these cyclic myths that have to do with essentially agrarian lifestyles, you know, the harvest and everything, but also contains the idea of the death and reincarnation of the soul. And from a pagan perspective, magic is simply the alignment of the self with nature, and it's working with natural forces. So it's not seen as transgressive. So that's where the Christian paradigm, and probably every other religion, views magic as transgressive, as disobeying the gods. Whereas in the pagan frame of mind, magic is working in harmony with nature, and that it's just an extension of what we are. Danielson says, common people believe religion, wise men know it's false, and leaders find it useful too. Exactly. That's my take on it. Common people believe in religion. Wise men know it's false. Leaders find it useful as a useful tool. But I think it's also a gatekeeping operation, because what we would describe as spirituality, or what falls into the realm of mysticism and magic, are now put under the control of the authorities. And that's what I think their purpose is. So anybody who starts going down this path is going to hit a certain cul-de-sac. They want you visually illiterate. They want you incapable of telling real from fake. You think they want you in any way finding out what your mind is truly capable of? Probably not. Someone asks, do I study astrology? I've certainly looked into it. I'm very familiar with it. And And, you know, I used to do this thing, and I should try looking into this again, but it was something I found in a book. And the idea here was that there are certain cycles, events in your life that you will find correspond to the sign that you're under. And that if you were to like draw a cross on a page and draw a spiral and you mark the years and you look where you are at the same point of the year every following year as the spiral goes out, you try to ascertain patterns in your life. And I started picking up on patterns, like things that were repeating almost to the day, sometimes specifically to the day, where it felt like I'm repeating certain cycles. And so if you repeat a cycle, you're going in a circle. But if you don't repeat it, if you learn or overcome it, then you are progressing, presumably. So it's more of a spiral than a circle. And the idea is that by becoming aware of the cycles, you break them. And by breaking the cycles, your life progresses like a spiral rather than going in circles. There's a idea of progress in the sense of overcoming certain aspects of the world and the self, but that you don't, or you wouldn't, if you weren't cognizant of the patterns. So I do think there's something to astrology. I do think there's quite a lot to it. I haven't figured it all out, but I certainly think this whole place is about time control. I mean, synchronicity itself, you know, it's all about timing. And I think that the reason why we have so much Saturn stuff, you know, the cube, Saturn, it's all about time and restriction. And it all pertains to the cycle of life and death, rebirth, reincarnation. Copacetic says Church of IPSology. Yeah, I talked about getting a 501c3 because this is a philosophical think tank, and we could probably, you know, expand it to conversations about, well, what we're going to talk about anyway. Because I've been finding the whole topic of Gnosticism very useful in describing our deconstruction of the world stage and the concept of the media Gnostic. In other words, gathering based on knowledge and informed disbelief, rooted in skepticism, rather than believers. So the media believers are the mainstream and alternative. And I am very much detached from the world stage. I'm a non-believer. I see what's going on in the news. You think I'm worried about it? Danielson says it takes 2,180 years to have a new age. When we have a new sign, we're now in Aquarius. 2180 is 6 times 6 times 60. Yeah, that's true. The age of Aquarius, the new age, which is a common theme in all these various traditions. The Thalemites say we're in the Aeon of Horus. I've heard Age of Fire. There are various terms, but I was told by Thalemites that the Age of Aquarius, the water bearer, refers to information and knowledge being poured out, that water symbolizes wisdom, but that we will be flooded with knowledge, that there would be a deluge. And so far, that has come true. This is when I first encountered them. They even said that the new god archetype that would replace the patriarchal sun god would be the androgen, which they call the crowned conquering child. And the reason why they say child is that it represents the merging of the elements of the sun, or the Osiris and Isis. So you have these two, masculine, feminine, but also child meaning starting afresh, that it's breaking away with the previous traditions. Danielson says, I hope reincarnation is not true. It's taken me 53 years to get this far. I'm no wiser. If I could come back with retained memory, then. Yeah, I'm not really sure. There are some who say that you don't want to reincarnate. This is a trap, that the archons will try to trick you into coming back to finish some job when all you're doing is you're powering a matrix under the control of a false god. Then there's the I Am Temple, and they believe that you can choose to stay behind and help those who are on their way out. So you have your friends who have been stuck in the cycle of reincarnation. Maybe you can stick around and guide them. They call them ascended masters. They channel them, supposedly. Like, is this a prison planet? I mean, I certainly think that it is a battleground, a spiritual warfare zone, and that not everyone is actively participating. And I think that there are beings of darkness who inhabit a large swath of the population. And I think many others are here operating from the light end of the spectrum. And then there are many who are just gray NPCs in the middle, apathetic. But I can't say for sure. But I don't think that death is the end. That's one thing. I do auto-hoax death itself. I think death is a major hoax. Like, it happens, sure, but it's not the end, for good or for ill. Jamarian says, you know what? Some people will say, you're talking about in these relationships, like, are psychopaths or narcissists demonic? I think what we're actually seeing here are people who are, for whatever reason, tuned in to the lower astral realm, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I think a lot of people are just vehicles. And I think the reason why you attract them is if you operate on the other end, you're seen as a viable source of light, your food. I think that's all it comes down to. It's food. I think that the natural balance here is that the dark will seek out the light to exterminate it. And I think this realm is run by the dark side. They have a home field advantage. And the other advantage is most people don't know that they're in a spiritual war for their souls, which is why most people hand their souls over with very little resistance. And I heard this atheist podcast today where these two individuals are talking about this idea that, we don't have souls. And I think that's funny. I think it's funny when people say, I'm just an animal with no free will and no soul. I'm like, yeah, speak for yourself, but yeah, please. I mean, I like animals. I do. I love animals. But if you are one and you can admit it to me, I think that's great. So Danielson says this place is intelligently designed, but whether those that created this place are benevolent is not clear to me. Well, in the Gnostic idea, the source of all life is not the creator of this world. This world is created by us, a lesser entity. And since it cannot create souls, it can only create what's called the architect. And I think this is the great architect of the universe. But it's not like the source of everything. And so it's not something to worship. And I think this is the thing that is worshipped by all the religions. So it's a sick joke, because a lot of well-intentioned Christians might actually be worshiping the material realm's architect when they think it's God. And so what are they feeding? Well, they're feeding the enslaver of souls. That's the Gnostic concept. And they say you do not want to be reincarnated. You want a GTFO. You want to unplug from the matrix. You don't want to be a source, because apparently to be embodied here is to be cut off from the entirety of your being. So you're actually, it's like being drugged and being taken into captivity. So you're here in a state of ignorance, in a world that overemphasizes the ego, de-emphasizes the soul, and that's to keep you at this level so you don't ascend. So it does seem to be a big trap. A question is, though, is this trap, is it voluntary or involuntary? Is this some kind of a trick? But I certainly do agree that the place that we're in is definitely a realm of ignorance, in the sense that we are cut off from wherever we came from. We arrive here with nothing. But if you look at the way this place is organized, we talk about the media, mind control, the internalized Truman Show. What do you think the point of it is? Is the point of the internalized Truman Show to keep you of a limited perspective so you don't acquire the knowledge, the gnosis, that would be needed for you to transcend? So we look at the people who are plugged into the matrix, who are brainwashed. We can laugh. We can, wonder, just like, are they ever going to wake up? But the truth of it is, they might be hypnotized at the level of the soul. Like, we might be looking at essentially condemned people, and they're tricked by following the world state church and its simulation and its reduction of man to a mere, I guess, accident of evolution, not the center of the universe, which is where I'm at. I think man is at the center of the universe. It's not about the world or its shape or lack thereof, but I think it's about where we are in the scope of creation. Plain Dakota says, I just want to have a good time, man. Well, from what I understand, you can have a good time forever. Like, I think maybe this is some kind of carnival, which is the satanic perspective. They say the world is a carnival, which means celebration of the carnal, the flesh, and that you're here to enjoy it, essentially. And you can believe that if you want to. I would find it more enjoyable if I didn't think that this was, in fact, good versus evil. Plain Dakota says there was a horrible episode of Black Mirror where they were just living in a battery that goes on for infinity, basically. Well, there are people who believe they've been here a few times. What do they call it? Old souls or something. So my question, though, let's say, okay, now if this is a Gnostic or a demiurge's prison, and the Gnostics were right, let's just say that's the case. How do you account for billions of souls now? I mean, if souls have to be, captured or reincarnated, there'd be a finite number. So how's it expanding? And my only explanation for that is that the demiurge is winning, and that it's essentially trapping more new ones all the time. Do you have any solid proof of the paranormal or supernatural? Well, do you have any solid proof that you have a soul? I mean, this is the question, because we get into this realm of, Are you going to constrain your understanding of life in the universe to what the scientists that work for the establishment can measure? Or are you going to go outside of that and include your own experiences of it? I mean, you don't have to include other people's experiences. I don't convey my experiences as evidence for other people to use, but my own personal experiences have left me outside the boundaries of the establishment friendly scientific method. I think that even psychology doesn't go far enough. I think there are boundaries for the masses to keep them from understanding what's behind the surface on some of these matters. And so, by my direct experience, paranormal, supernatural, that would be a yes. I don't think it's a question. And I think that another element to it as well is that this stuff has always been gate kept. If you look at the origin of the New Age teachings, these various schools of thought on magic, where do you think it came from? You know, it comes from these secret societies. And so it's been kept out of the hands of the masses like a suppressed technology. But if people want to live in ignorance of these matters, you know, I'm all for it. You can remain a strict materialist. But do you believe you have a soul? Do you have a concept of a transpersonal part of the self that isn't constrained by the physical senses? Have you ever had, you know, any experiences that have contradicted what we're told this place is and our place in it? And I've had what I would consider to be transcendental or even paranormal, supernatural experiences for a long time, but I never really had a reason to, you know, bring them up, because generally speaking, people are very close-minded about such things, or they're afraid. But I think some of these things are better put in the realm of psychology than the supernatural. But there's a point where these two are almost inseparable. But to understand this, you would have to redefine the model of the world. Are you an object on an object? Is this universe such that we're a speck of dust in a vast abyss? And are we just not even the center of anything at all, but just a blip on the radar, possibly inconsequential in the big scheme of things? Or are we the center of everything? And I do think we are the center of everything, and that man has a very specific role. I think matter is a substrate of mind. But one thing I can say, those who practice this stuff don't do it because it's entertaining. And I think it's also important to point out, like, what is the difference between somebody who believes in it and someone who doesn't, generally speaking? One of them has experienced it or tried it or researched it. Same thing with, like, let's say the moon landing. 90% of the people believe in it, 10% don't. What's the difference? The 10% who don't have researched the matter. So when someone says, oh, I don't think it's true, or how do you know? I'm like, well, if you don't have any personal stake or research in the matter, then what value is your non-belief? Is it incredulity, or is it valid skepticism? Because I'm a skeptic, even with these things. I'm incredibly skeptical. Jermaine May says, you talked about fasting. Do you feel any physical or spiritual effects as a result of this experience? You know, I think that there's an effect that fasting has on any sort of ascetic practice. If you're talking about changing your focus and perhaps even blurring the boundaries of the ego and its constraints, fasting has, you know, long been recognized as a spiritual practice. You know, I can go 3 or 4 days without even thinking about food. I do that occasionally now. And I found it to be very calming. Like I've lost a lot of stress. Like I know at any time I can just sit there and not move for a few days and nothing's going to end. The sense that I always have to be doing something, fight or flight, used to be a consistent thing with me, and it's really not anymore. And I attribute part of that to fasting. I find the effects of sleep deprivation to be even more effective in dislodging the normal waking state of consciousness. And a lot of the things that lead to psychosis and madness are consistent with what are known in many traditions as spiritual practices. Because there's a pretty fine line between mysticism and madness, which is why it's referred to as crossing the abyss. The difference is, the person who goes mad loses their center. They lose the I, they lose their ego entirely instead of just dislodging or expanding it. But it does involve this process of breaking down the concept of self and then reintegrating. And if you disintegrate, you're pretty much in what you'd consider to be the schizoid, mentally ill territory. I mean, if you think about it, you can make the argument that any sort of religious belief is a mental illness. If you only operate from the mainstream perspective, as far as the mainstream scientifically validated paradigm, then yeah, religious ecstasy is madness. Magic is delusion. In fact, magical thinking is considered a symptom of some kind of madness or another. But what about prayer? So we kind of like allow this spot, we allow this place where like religion gets a pass. They get to do all kinds of crazy stuff, and we don't call that madness. But when it comes to the question of mind affecting matter and synchronicity and that kind of thing, it's very easy, for that stuff to be labeled as ill, which makes sense. If you go with the dominant paradigm, the scientific model of the world, it's mental illness. But if you go with the traditional model, it's demonic or evil, which we had a caller who reiterates that from a Christian perspective, a lot of the stuff that we call that falls under psychic or magic is just evil. But that's on brand for the powers that be. It's like the whole model of the Gnostic idea of the Garden of Eden is simply that knowledge sets you free. So why do you think the tree of knowledge is banned? All right, let's see here. We've been on for 2 hours. I'm going to, again, test out the phones. We're going to be using them more often. I'm going to try to improve the sound. Right now, I was using the laptop, but I might be picking up a phone for this so that when I'm mobile, we can still do calls. And if we're going to do phones, I will put a question on the screen. So tonight it was your thoughts on demons. Hopefully people in the comments can add to it and I will respond. I think it's an open conversation. It's a fair topic now. And you've heard my thoughts on it. I'm also interested in people's direct experiences, if you've had any in these matters. As far as aliens go, ufology has not uncovered anything. And the stories about aliens are admitted government manufactured myths. It's mythology. But it does seem it could be a new mythology based on old mythology. So there could be an overlap. But are we going to experience an alien invasion? That's a separate question. Like as far as the theater of Psy-War, I tend to think not. I think the predictive programming for an alien invasion has always been there to prepare us for a higher intelligence taking control, specifically AI. But I guess the next topic should be, do we believe in aliens, to follow this up? Because there is an overlap. Do you know who the first person to report seeing an alien was, or a craft, a light from the sky landing? Marjorie Cameron from the Babylon working. So here you have a combination of, Jack Parsons, Mystery Babylon, Black Magic, L. Ron Hubbard, science fiction, and movie starlet Marjorie Cameron. And they're trying to summon from the abyss this spirit to get to incarnate through her. And if you look at the abyss as even possibly outer space, she did claim to have seen a light in the sky. And this was a year before Roswell. Copaesthetic says Alex Jones would rather eat his neighbor's dookie buns than fast. Yeah, he did say he would eat his neighbor's 6 weeks into the lockdowns before he would fast. Right. He did say that. Well, food's a drug. Food is a drug. And it's not good to be dependent on things. And so I use it as an opportunity to break cycles. It's, self-control. I don't like to be compulsory. Like, I like the idea of being in, mind over matter. Like, if I wanted to run myself to death, I probably could. Like, I am in control here. And when I say I don't mean the meat suit. Whatever's in control of this thing. John Cordone says, we're each tied to an ethereal octopus. We are like suction cups on a tentacle. I do think we're all connected. One way of looking at it is, I would say, if you look at the universe as a vast ocean, and we are all icebergs. So we're of the ocean. We're still, frozen though. But we experience ourselves as the tip of the iceberg. So there's much more beneath the surface. And beneath the surface, we're all connected. We're all in the same ocean. And this is where our transpersonal merges. This is where we have our collective unconscious. So yes, we are all one with the universe, with each other. We have this illusion of pure distinction, but it's mostly just illusion in that sense. And this interconnectedness is just inherent in the system that we're in. And more than that, it is our conscious experience and perception that actually, not to say creates, but the universe isn't really created or condensed into material until we perceive it. Like, the future doesn't exist. The universe doesn't exist until it's perceived. So when we think of the future, it's not like the universe could be, like, you could get a time machine and shoot into the future 1,000 years. Because I don't think it even exists until it's processed through us. So when I say the universe is human-centric, that's pretty much what I mean. The degree to which the individual affects the entirety of the ocean, that's a matter of, I guess, up to, it depends, probably varies. But this would explain why the media matrix would want to harness the multitudes. It explains Super Bowls, big psyops. You want to get the focus attention of as many nodes as possible and channel their collective co-creative power into your vision. If I'm right about this, meaning if the powers that be know very well the true structure of the universe and that maybe it's more than what we're being told, they would be operating at that level. Yeah, the movie we're supposed to watch is Atropia. Or is it? Yeah, I think it's Atropia. And it's basically about a 24/7 war simulation. I've been watching this video of a plane dodging a missile, and it's going viral, and all the people sharing it are just proud. They're shedding tears, like, oh, while you're at home, our boys are out there dodging missiles, and they're all super prideful about it. It turns out it's a clip from a simulation. Like, you can just make some stuff up, upload it, and people will give you millions of hits. Fake makes more money, it gets a lot of clicks. A lot of truthers are simply engagement baiters at this point, and there's zero accountability. Like they've lost the plot, and they're just as entertained by war kicking off in Iran as they are by looking at Jim Carrey and speculating as to whether or not he's been cloned or replaced for saying too much about the Illuminati. You see, like, there's no way of saying one idea or concept is more important than the other. Everything has been rendered irrelevant. And this is what Huxley's work foreshadowed. A time where the truth would no longer have relevance. But it's been this way for a long time. I think it's just more pronounced. Because the world stage is, in fact, a world of lies, and truth was never a consideration. Media was never there to inform you. Its purpose has always been to conform you. And from what I can tell, it's doing just that. The movie screen, the TV screen is the Overton window. And right now they've opened up the Overton window and they've let demons and aliens through. So now, in our hyper reality, aliens and demons exist. We should bring back cryptids, chupacabras, Bigfoots. It's all fair game. If you want to talk about chupacabra sightings, that's going to be mainstream news very soon. Copaesthetic says IPS movie nights. Yeah, for real. We need to consolidate a list of must-see movies. And I will watch that Atropia and do a review. Although the rest of tonight, I have to finish working on my great deconstruction project. It's a work in progress. I have it in 3 chunks. This first part will be out soon. But that's going to form the basis for expanding this off-world stage perspective. We want to scale up and bring more people in. But to do so, we have to provide some foundational work. Like, so what is our research rot? A methodology, a framework for assessing media, but also a timeline we can provide that shows from 1963 to 2026, the following events were fake. And when you consider the totality of that, the accumulated fakery, you can understand how our history has been bent and how this affects the now, the consensus worldview, which rests upon decades of fakery. And that's how you can expose the program so those who are stepping outside of it can fully separate from the duopoly of mainstream and alternative media. Have a great evening. We will continue this conversation in Discord. I want to say thanks to all of the commenters and especially the callers. Thanks for calling. We all appreciate it, and I look forward to your comments. Just leave the comments below, and I'll answer those in a follow-up.